everyone, and welcome to our session tonight at ELI 2016. We're really excited to have such a big group of people here with us. I'm Patrice Prusko, an instructional designer at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and I'm the virtual buddy for tonight's session along with Chris. So we'll go around and just do a really quick introduction before we get into the conversation. And Chris, since you're the other buddy tonight, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Chris Gilliard. I'm based in Detroit, and I'm a professor at Macomb Community College.
Autumn, do you want to go next?
Okay. Autumn, go ahead.
Hi, Autumn Keynes, Capital University, Columbus, Ohio. I'll pass it on to whoever's next.
Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Mattia. I'm an author for lynda.com now. I've gone outside of the university system, and I'm based out of Los Angeles, California now.
And Helen?
I'm Helen DeWard, based in Central Ontario, university instructor, media and digital literacies. Hi, all.
Rebecca?
Rebecca Hogue, co-founder of Virtually Connecting and multi-affiliated adjunct located in Santa Clara, California.
And now we will turn it over to the ELI 2016 folks.
Hi, I'm Rachel Clemens, CIO at St. Norbert College, soon to be Davidson College.
And I'm Kyle Johnson. I'm the CIO at Chaminade University in Honolulu.
I'm Joe Murphy. I'm the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College.
I'm Allison Julian Salisbury, Director of Higher Ed at EdSearch.
I'm Kristen Eshleman, Director of Digital Learning R&D at Davidson College. Lee Scaller at Bassett. I'm at DTLT at the University of Mary Washington.
Sundi Richard. I'm an instructional designer at St. Norbert College.
Great. So we've been chatting a little bit about what we've been watching on the Twitter feed, but we'd love to hear from each of you what some of the really things that you guys are talking about and what exciting is going on over there in San Antonio.
You can start.
I don't want to start.
So I sat in on a session today on sort of learning space design, and it was actually vendor sponsored, and you're always a little wary, right, when you go into those by Steelcase, but they did a really good job, I thought, sort of setting the stage, and then they had a couple folks from UNC Chapel Hill talking about some of the ways they've been converting their old tiered lecture halls into sort of group learning spaces. They're still doing 100 or 200 students in the room, but they've got some really interesting work that they're doing on how to sort of architect the room and the space and the technology to make that all work. And what was really cool, and I hope they're able to post it, one of the faculty did a time lapse of her hour-and-a-half long lecture, so you could really see how the students sort of ebbed and flowed through the space.
I want to bring up the keynote because it was a great start to the day, and I would love to hear what other people thought of Randall or Randy Bass talking to us today about what was the title? Disruption to design, like that? Right. About learning, the learning ecosystem and the whole person, I think were some of the things that got talked about. So does anyone have any reactions to the...
Yeah, I'll just add, for those of you who, if you've ever been to Eli in the past, this is by far, I think, one of the best Elis I've seen in a while. I think the duration of it, the intimacy, the location, everything's been wonderful, and the keynotes in particular, just to take Cindy's lead on that, have been a perfect framing for what seems to be, in my opinion anyway, a lot of people who are poised to jump into innovation in new ways and are really seeking help with that, seeking networks that are going to make that happen on their campus and beyond. It just seems like we're on the verge of something really interesting in academic technology, and this is the most buy-in I've seen for that kind of push in a long time.
I think there was an interesting connection. So Joe and I sat on a panel about the role of
place-based learning or place-based institutions in a virtual world. I can't remember what the specific title was now, but we talked about the idea of community and how community is very present in a liberal arts institution, and yet we can't just look at community as a physical thing, as is evidenced sort of by the Be Connecting session, right? That we need to be considering sort of digital virtual community as well as physical community. And I think it tied in nicely with what Randy Bass talked about in terms of students developing digital presence to digital fluency to digital agency ultimately. And again, I think bringing back to our campuses, we need to help our students sort of understand this interconnected digital physical world and how to navigate those and develop some amount of fluency and then eventually agency in that environment. Yeah, I'm curious just to engage the folks on the other end. What did you see in the Twitter sphere that shocked you the most or that intrigued you the most?
For me this morning when I was watching through the keynote, starting a couple of years ago, I started referring to myself as an academic ecologist. My background is actually in marine biology and marine ecology, so I was pleasantly surprised to see that showing up in the conversation this morning. I was really curious to see what the reaction in the room to applying ecological principles to the idea of academic technology was.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me that sort of anybody, leapt out of their chair with an aha moment, right? I think, so what you saw on Twitter, I think, was probably the reaction, right? So.
Well, I think, for me, I got the feeling that Kristen just said, that it seemed like it was a lot of really, really great conversations were going on, and that there was a definite shift in the conversation. It seemed to be a lot more focused on being thoughtful about the use of technology, thinking about pedagogy, and thinking about the whole student. And it just made me wish I was there even more.
Wish you were here too.
Yeah.
Likewise.
The thing that I was wondering is how it maybe juxtaposed itself to yesterday's keynote, because it seemed to me that yesterday's keynote maybe took a little bit of a different direction with maybe a little bit more toward what some people call vocational training, or I'm not sure. Maybe I'm way off base. I'm not there. What do you guys think?
Not way off base.
Yeah, no, Joe's right. I think some of that is where you're coming from, right? This is Arizona State University versus Georgetown. So those are two very different campuses with a different set of challenges that they're innovating to solve. Makes sense.
I did take away an awful lot from yesterday's keynote that was about education for citizenship broadly, which includes work, in the way that it was presented yesterday. Today's keynote was definitely included a lot more about the formation of the whole student.
Yeah, and Joe and I have been debating a little bit about this over breakfast, in fact, around that nature of work and what that means going forward. So, we talk about workforce as if it's this thing somewhat beneath us in higher education, but that's not really what we're training, educating people to do. But the nature of work is going to change in ways that really mean they have to be creative knowledge producers, and that's very much in alignment with what we're teaching. So our education is increasingly becoming vocational, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing.
And I think I heard Michael Crow talk later in the day, and they're very concerned with access, which I think we all should be, and they're using a lot of different strategies around that. So you could see it as, if you sort of forget the big public, you could see it as sort of a focus on access and diversity, and then a focus on, once you get them there, how do we develop them as a whole person? So it could be much more of a continuum than maybe they were stitched together by the speakers themselves.
Yeah, Dr. Crow, I think, has an unfortunate lead-in, which he really focuses and talks about public institutions to the exclusion of everything else, and it really makes you feel like, or wonder whether anything he's doing or talking about is applicable. But again, Ray and I were in that same afternoon session, and his chief of staff did talk about the fact that their idea is, yes, they excluded a bunch of institutions while they're collaborating because they needed institutions like them but not competitive with them, so they could figure out how institutions could collaborate. And their hope is they can take what they've learned and share that as a model for collaboration. So not necessarily that my school would ever collaborate with his, but rather there would be a model available that we could figure out how to collaborate with other schools like us who don't compete with us. So the keynote, I think, unfortunately, felt very slanted, but the afternoon session, if you were able to go, I think painted a very different kind of picture.
Well, keynote was a stump speech, right?
Right.
So, sound bites.
So something I was wondering that kind of follows up with something I said before was I know we always leave the conference all kind of jazzed up, and we're surrounded by people that are like-minded, but what are people talking about that they're taking back to help influence change when they get back to their institutions? And especially kind of those people that are leading from the margins.
I'm taking Kristen back.
No, she's taking it back. That's what that is.
No. It's literally one way to do it. One of the things that I'm taking back maybe it's just the people I've been interacting with is that there is a lot of change, like even in this room. You're leaving one job and going to the other. Everyone that I've been at the tables have all been in their jobs for less than 6 months. Now that's not the norm, and it's a small sample size, but it was also really interesting that everyone, anytime I talked to people at the table, it was like, oh, I've only been in this job for a year, oh, I've only been in this job for 18 months, or oh, I've only been in this job for 3 months. And so there's this tremendous, to me, looking at it, there seems to be this shift, this new blood, this churning or something that's going on that I feel like that there's a change in the community, and a part of that. And so to go forward, there are people out there in these same situations who are struggling with these same issues at exactly the same time. And there's something really, I think, powerful about that. And so that's something that I'm personally going to take with me in that sort of way. It's all this information, but all of the sort of new people, right? Even if they've been in it for a while, they're changing positions, they're going to new places, they're going to different places. What change is that going to bring? Just thinking about your talk about the champions, the black sheep, and all of that kind of stuff, and positioning into that. So.
And just to kind of add on to that, something going back to Kristen's presentation that some of us were in just a couple minutes ago, language to talk about these things. Mm. I found, especially with Randy Bass and the 3 horizons that institutions are at, that was part of Kristen's talk, it gives us language to talk about these things, where our institutions are at and how we're going to change those things. So the whole person, those kind of things have been really great. Has anyone else felt that language was kind of a thing here?
Well, or even just frameworks, right? So I think, so Eli and EDUCAUSE are putting out these sort of pathways and assessments where you can kind of benchmark where you are sort of relative to some of the maturity in this, right? And even just being able to say, hey, look, we're a 1 or we're a 4, what is this, where are we and what does that mean and where do we want to go? Maybe we don't want to be a 4, maybe we want to be a 2, and that's okay, but at least we have some way of measuring or just creating visibility around some of those things.
Yeah, I'll just add one more point because I'm going to make Allison talk here. To pick up on what Lee was saying, also what Ray was just saying, I think the networking piece seems more important than before, and EdSurge is really poised to become a great sort of third-party partner for us. I think we can talk to each other about change, but we have that inside perspective, and we lack that outside perspective to help us expand the way we might look at it. So that whole Horizons 3 thing was actually her, and that's her sort of being connected to industry. And so I think people like EdSurge are going to help connect us to each other, going to help connect us to industry in very interesting ways. Maybe Allison can say a little bit about that.
Or not. I don't want to use this time to do an EdSurge pitch, but anyone who's interested in sort of storytelling around this and figuring out how we build networks around this that are more, that go beyond what we do at conferences, would love to talk to you about your ideas. We're just getting started.
I'm kind of interested in seeing whether I've heard 2 kinds of collaborations talked about a lot at ELI, and a lot of them are cross-institutional, and a lot of them are intra-institutional. And I think there's been, particularly this year more so than in previous years, I've heard a lot more extremely positive talk about go meet your colleagues in wherever, and give them your story and take their story and find a way to work together. So I would love if there were. Malcolm just walked out. I would love if there were a way that, I'll tell him I said it later. He can watch it on YouTube. I'd love if there were a way to measure how many of these cross-institutional collaborations really started and how many inside your institutions. How many people actually did go home and reach out to somebody in student affairs? Would just be a neat thing to know.
Are there any other questions?
I was going to say, I know one of the projects that I was working on at CSU Channel Islands when I was there, and at others, is the Domain of One's Own project. And there's a lot of institutions that are starting all over to get involved with that project, and there's a very tight-knit community for that's implementing across the board, where they're collaborating with each other. They've been working with Ken Lane, developing some APIs to be able to integrate the various different systems to push the data back and forth to allow that kind of cross-institutional collaboration that they piloted at Mary Washington with the Domain of One's Own stuff there. So I was glad to hear that kicked out in the keynote as well this morning.
And people don't know, Lee back here works at University of Mary Washington and is part of that.
Yeah.
One thing that we'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about was the discussion around design, and that everyone is a designer, and as well as a little bit about your design thinking workshop that you did yesterday, and what were some kind of key findings, takeaways, things that surprised you.
So we didn't do a design thinking workshop yesterday. Joe and Donnie Sendelbach and I will be doing one for 30 liberal arts colleges tomorrow post-conference. But that's really more of a game storming versus design thinking session. It did come up so where it came up for me in this meeting is in the blending with MOOCs pop-up think tank that the Dartmouth folks ran. And our takeaway from that was we're not doing enough design thinking in a lot of our processes around innovation. So if any of you are MOOC campuses, you probably did it like we did. You just sort of jumped in with both feet. But you didn't really think about what problems the institution was trying to solve. What are our administrators interested in MOOCs for? Having that honest conversation about PR and revenue and trying to get our faculty to let us know what kinds of things they're interested in with MOOCs and what do students want to get out of this and what does staff need to pull this off. We never had those conversations in a real concerted way. So we came out of the blending with MOOCs pop-up think tank with a framework that we're going to share out to everyone on process. So when you want to do innovation, this is the process we recommend. And in particular, those first two phases, right? Empathize and define. Make sure you know who you're designing for, and make sure your problem statement is really clear before you jump into it. And I think we would have avoided a lot of headaches around the MOOC experiment had we done that. But I haven't seen much beyond that around design, except just talk, Patrice, about we should all be designers. Hearing that a lot.
Okay.
Well, now there was some back channeling on Twitter as well around that. Is like, well, what do we mean by design? And what kinds of design are we talking about? Are we talking about program design? Are we talking about project design? Are we talking about just presentation design? That was a big thing in the back channel too. It was. So again, thinking through about, for me in any case, is like, what kind of training do we all have around this? And I'll admit that that's a huge blind spot for me, right? How do we shift that kind of thinking in a meaningful way towards it? And I don't have the answer, but that's something that a question I'm grappling with as well. Is that question of design?
Well, and for me, with the design thing, it troubles me a little bit, and I get worried about it because I worry about like designing ourselves into a box. How do we leave things somewhat open, right, where we can kind of have some creativity, where we can do a little bit more on the fly, where everything isn't planned beforehand. So yeah, that was a huge pet peeve for me, Lee. I saw you on Twitter, and I was following the stream, and it was just like, well, what are you talking about when you talk about design? What are you designing for?
So for me, it's sort of design thinking in particular is how I think about what it means to be a designer. And for me, that's the context. And it actually, I think it's useful for precisely the reason you just described. That it's by definition an iterative process where you're always soliciting feedback from your user. So maybe your user's a faculty or maybe your user's a student, but it's sort of a process of continual feedback, and then that feedback sort of being incorporated into the next iteration of whatever the thing you're doing is. And so what it means to be a designer is actually to facilitate a process that allows for that empathy and that feedback then sort of support sort of changes really rapidly, not changes like every 3 years or every semester, but potentially every few weeks in what you're doing.
Well, and I also think a really important aspect in some of the work that I've seen design thinking applied to is not asking, so it is incorporation of feedback, but it's not asking users, right? It's not, because we can't articulate often, or we don't know what we want, or we think we want something, but really we need something else. So, I've seen really good design thinking be applied, right, where you're actually observing people interacting and figuring out how to solve the problems that they may or may not even know they have. And I think that's really important too. I also think in our session, Joe, we had a really interesting question about design, which is we think a lot about physical spaces and how to make them facilitate learning and maybe even incorporate the digital into physical spaces. And the question came up about designing online spaces to reflect the intimacy and community of our campuses, which I thought was a really thoughtful question and something I haven't really thought much about at all. So I thought that was really interesting to think about. Are we, I don't know that anybody is, to be honest, are we thinking about our online spaces and how to make them extensions of our, at least in the case of the liberal arts, our very beautiful, very welcoming campuses?
My Moodle's in the school colors, doesn't that count?
That might be more than that, but I think that also speaks back to something I think that Rebecca threw into the chat earlier, which was holding, kind of digital citizenship classes in the first year, right? Like, it's one thing to say that we're going to broaden our digital presence, I guess, to include more than just even the classroom, but to really create a space for our whole community. But that also means that our students have to have agency. They have to feel comfortable working in those spaces and talking in those spaces, being a person, having an identity in those spaces, and that can be problematic with a first-year student who's used to just, being on social media with their friends, right? How do I talk in like a bigger way?
We almost need to make it a requirement. I'm teaching a class right now that's an elective, a first-year elective, that most of my students are actually third and fourth-year undergrads. And they all went into it thinking, oh, I was pretty tech savvy, and with each week they learn one more tool and realize that they had no clue, right? That they're learning so much, and with each week one more set. It's wonderful to teach because I love watching the lights go on every time they say, like, oh, that's how this works, or this is what Twitter's all about, not about your lunch. But on the other hand,
I don't want to interrupt the conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time there too. It's been about 30 minutes. If you guys want to keep going, that would be great, but we understand if you have places to be.
Well, I wanted to say that I want to sort of give a credit to Sundi, because I think we also need to look at the same sort of digital citizenship and digital competencies for faculty and staff too, right? And so Sundi has created at St. Norbert a digital identity, network, and pedagogy class that's helping our faculty think critically about their digital identities and networks and connections in ways that even some of our most savvy faculty are like, wow, I really learned something there. Our most digitally savvy faculty. So I think that that's a really important component too, that we can't assume that it's only students in our institutions that need this competency.
Yep, absolutely.
Is that up somewhere and available, like the syllabus?
I'll do a little plug for a project I'm involved in called the SUNY Taupe, And it is a free resource that's available online that has some activities and things related to digital identity and digital citizenship, along with a number of other things.
Yeah, and ours is open. It's our first iteration, so it was a group of 6 faculty, so it was quite small. But the resources for it are definitely open, and I'll share it out. So,
yeah. Yeah, tweet that out, Patrice.
Yeah.
What is the link for that?
We want to just do it later.
We'll do it later.
Okay.
So yeah, I think some people have plans. How are you guys feeling?
I've got 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. So, are there any last questions that some people in the virtual world didn't really get to ask anything? Is there anything else there, Helen or Chris G?
I'm just going to jump in and see, is there now more of a transition or permeable borders between learning spaces and spaces for business or industry, beyond just where it used to be with just research focused? Do you see other things happening from different spaces that get our students into the work world without focusing, say, necessarily on a research project? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The closest thing that I feel like I've seen was some of the discussions yesterday around maker spaces, which in cases talked about being very intentional about how they welcome other community members. They are not open in that, in the sense of we just happen to host a makerspace and anyone can use it, but some really interesting programming around, the one that sticks in my mind was bring in the faculty kids. And once the faculty kids 3D print something neat, the faculty members will get the idea. But there are some other ways in which that kind of new space on our campus is being thought of in the way that might be attractive appropriately to other community members. I don't know if anybody else has seen that kind of.
Okay. Thanks.
Do you have anything?
Yeah. It actually is something we're working on at Kenyon, but I'll have more to talk about in a year or two about that one.
All right. So, are we going to go ahead and wrap that up?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye.